And so that's how I found myself on a little boat with a group of strangers coming to Cuttyhunk for the first time and having the experience that so many of our residents have had since then, where it's like, what's this going to be like? Who am I going to meet? What's the boat going to be like? And then that first moment of seeing Cuttyhunk appear on the horizon, arriving at the dock, and there's Tamalin with a pickup truck, and there's some golf carts because there actually aren't really cars on Cuttyhunk, just golf carts mostly. And then the 10-minute walk up to the Avalon and coming around the corner and seeing those chimneys since reconstructed for the first time overlooking the hill. And just having this kind of amazing feeling of walking into a different world, a little bit of a different time.
Today I'm talking with Tamalin Baumgarten and Meredith Leich, co-directors of the Cuttyhunk Island Artist Residency. They are both working artists whose creative practices unfold alongside a deep commitment to community, care, and place. This conversation is about how an artist residency grew from a family home on a remote island into a living creative ecosystem. We talk about Cuttyhunk as a formative landscape, how their partnership developed through friendship and shared responsibility, and what it really takes to hold space for artists in a meaningful way. At its heart, this is a conversation about creative life beyond the studio, about hospitality, trust, logistical labor, and the quiet work of building conditions where artists can arrive, open up, and feel less alone. Tamalin and Meredith, welcome to I'm Here Too. So glad to have you both.
Thank you for having us. It's great to be here.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're just going to jump right in. We're going to start with talking a little bit about place. So, you are both working artists who have very robust creative practices. So, I'm really curious, how did Cuttyhunk Island first become a place that mattered to you, not just as a location, but as a landscape that shaped your creative life? Tamalin, let's start with you.
Well, my connection to Cuttyhunk began through my grandfather, who purchased a home there in 1957 called the Avalon. And the Avalon was built in 1909. It's a beautiful old house that sits on a hill overlooking Vineyard Sound and Buzzards Bay. And I went to Cuttyhunk only a few times when I was a child, but I have some very vivid memories of being there and the freedom I felt there as a kid. Cuttyhunk is so safe, and you're allowed as a child to just roam the island on your own or with your friends. And we'd go by ourselves to the market and get penny candy. We'd go to the winter house lawn at night and tell ghost stories, and we could just be free and roam around and feel totally safe there. And I remember like some just fun times of the Avalon has a porch roof that's flat, and you can access it by going through one of the second story bedroom windows. And we would crawl out the window and jump off the roof onto mattresses, like really old mattresses, like probably as old as the house was. And just lovely memories being there as a child, even though I only went a couple of times. And when my grandfather passed away, he set the Avalon up in a nonprofit foundation called the Marilyn Snow House Foundation, named after his second wife, who loved being out there on Cuttyhunk. She would stay like year round in the house, like loved the solitude of it, took really good care of the house. And so he set the foundation up in her name, and it's meant to benefit the island community. So we use the house in ways to support the island. One of the ways is, well, through we host the artists and writers residencies there, and we also have a doctor's program where doctors will come, they'll stay for free, and then they offer their free services to the Cuttyhunk community. It's also a community building where people come up for summer concerts. And so my then kind of second introduction to Cuttyhunk was when I was older, when I had just graduated from Cornish College of the Arts. And it was 12 years since I had been to Cuttyhunk as a child. So I came back encouraged by my sister to go back with her. And we noticed that the house was in pretty bad disrepair. The bank account that my grandfather set up to take care of the place was totally drained. One of the chimneys had fallen down and practically left a hole in one side of the house. So many things were broken inside. The porch roof that we jumped off was kind of sagging. It was in pretty rough shape. And so when we got there, my sister and I volunteered doing the housekeeping for the rental season that year. We worked with the island community, who was so supportive of our efforts, and some key members of the community came and volunteered their time to help bring the Avalon back to life. And the following year, I ended up taking the innkeeping job there. So that's how I got back connected with the island and the Avalon, and I lived there for 6 months out of the year. And a lot of the reason I took that job was so that I could use Cuttyhunk and the community as inspiration for my paintings. I was really drawn to the landscape, and when I was there, I was also able to paint and work on my art. And um,
Wow. Wow. Okay, so we're gonna pin at the art because we're gonna circle around back to the residency. But before we do, Meredith, how about you? Like, what was your first introduction to the island?
So I entered the story much later, but I first came to Cuttyhunk almost 9 years ago on a gray day in May of 2017 when Tamalin was organizing the very first pre-residency residency. So this was a trial residency that she organized with a group of her grad school classmates and me. We had met a couple months earlier at the Vermont Studio Center, which was the first artist residency I'd ever attended. And I was drawn to Tamalin immediately, her incredible paintings, but also just her person. And she mentioned that she'd come to the residency, the Vermont Studio Center, specifically to learn how to run a residency because she was starting one on Cuttyhunk Island. And I'd never heard of Cuttyhunk Island, even though I grew up in Massachusetts. And in my own art at the time, I was creating a video installation about the New England whaling industry, and particularly thinking about the relationship between whaling and women. And Cuttyhunk is off the coast of New Bedford, which was a whaling center. And I'd been gone from Massachusetts for a very long time at that point, maybe 15 years. And so I was really intrigued and just said, hey, can I help in some way? If I can be any help. And so that's how I found myself on a little boat with a group of strangers coming to Cuttyhunk for the first time and having the experience that so many of our residents have had since then, where it's like, what's this going to be like? Who am I going to meet? What's the boat going to be like? And then that first moment of seeing Cuttyhunk appear on the horizon, arriving at the dock, and there's Tamalin with a pickup truck, and there's some golf carts because there actually aren't really cars on Cuttyhunk, just golf carts mostly. And then the 10-minute walk up to the Avalon and coming around the corner and seeing those chimneys since reconstructed for the first time overlooking the hill. And just having this kind of amazing feeling of walking into a different world, a little bit of a different time. And over the course of that trial residency, we really had free range over the island. And I got the first taste of what it's like to be together with a group of artists on this kind of remote, special landscape with just the freedom to connect and create for a few days. And then just you asked about how it's shaped our creative life as well. It also has really influenced my art, and I ended up creating a lot of video work on site on Cuttyhunk, so projected animations that I have created on the rocky shores of Cuttyhunk, for instance. And so it's been a place where I've really had a chance to workshop some ideas alongside workshopping our residency project.
I love that. So, Tamalin, you had this idea to start a residency. Where did that come from?
Well, first I have to say, I remember me being like, Meredith, will you please help me with this? But we remember we both wanted to work with each other. Um, so starting the residency, it didn't feel like such a far reach from my innkeeping experience and an experience in hospitality and um, working on the island and understanding the community and the logistics of the island. But I think mostly I felt excited to share that inspiration that I felt for my paintings when I was there. I wanted to share that with other artists. I thought that it's probably not just me that's going to be inspired by this place, and that was an exciting thought. And also, I went to grad school, and I really loved the community I found there. And even in my little Tribeca studio at New York Academy of Art, I was still painting Cuttyhunk. Like I kind of grounded my training in realistic painting around the subject of Cuttyhunk, the landscape, portraits of the people. And I loved being able to work alongside other artists where, you walk down the hall of studios and you can just stop and chat with people. And so I was nervous about losing that community when leaving grad school. And so starting the residency, I think, came from a few different things. The desire to continue an artist community, um, an excitement about sharing Cuttyhunk and seeing artists enjoy the magic of it, and a feeling of comfortability in my understanding of the Avalon and running it as an inn and the hospitality element.
And Meredith, I know you said you entered a little bit later and sort of like Tamlin had this idea, and then you were like, hey, somebody said, can you help? Or I want you to help, or I want to help. But like, what brought you to this idea of, yeah, I want to help and be of service to this residency?
So I think I've always been interested in not just art, but the context in which art happens. So I went to a liberal arts undergrad, Swarthmore College, where I studied art history. I think I thought it was a more practical choice in some sense, but I actually know that uh, any career in the arts is pretty precarious. But I studied art history, and I think I was interested in what conditions allowed artists to make art and what art moves forward into the world. So I think alongside always wanting to make art, the way that it happens is something that's interesting to me. And so after college, I ended up working for a couple of arts organizations. I worked for ArtNet in a database with auction results, and I worked for an artist fellowship called the 6 Points Fellowship for Emerging Jewish Artists, which was a short running, wonderful art initiative that gave out really large grants to emerging artists. And I was the program assistant and came on just before the call to application cycle was going out. And so I really got to witness and participate in the marketing, how we described the fellowship, the information sessions for the applicants, um, organizing the jury. I did all the tech backend for the applications. And then the excitement of bringing together the cohort and seeing how they gelled, and also seeing the values of my boss in this particular fellowship, like really trying to create a diverse and pluralistic cohort with people working in different media from different backgrounds with different interests. So that was a really impactful experience. And even though I went on to really focus on being an artist, that I think kind of like set the stage in my mind. And when I met Tamalin, and she had this vision, and it was really just a glimmer in her eye when I met her, and it was a glimmer. She was like, I'm doing this. I was excited by it. I think it felt both familiar and new to me. And it we went back and we were looking at some of our very first correspondences in 2017, and it was kind of like our dynamic was almost already in existence when we just started doing this, which was Tamalin had this idea and I was like, oh, maybe you could phrase it this way. And we just started saying yes to each other. And so I feel really lucky that I kind of got to hop on just as it was getting going. And then over the years, we've kept working together, and it's kind of grown into this really mutual partnership.
So I love that you talk about partnership, because that's where I wanted to go next. It's like you've got the idea, you've got the partner. And so Tamalin, like Meredith alluded to it, we say yes to each other, but can you go a little deeper and help us understand, like your partnership as co-directors? So less about task, but more about how you actually work together.
Yeah. Well, I think our working relationship comes mostly from our friendship. We really care about each other. And when you're working with a friend and there's sort of a casual, you can kind of express anything that comes to mind. Um, we talk on the phone for long periods of time, just brainstorming and reflecting on the past residency, thinking about how we could improve it for next year. We're both very kind of thorough people and detail oriented. And so we work well together in that sense. Like no detail is too small to kind of tweak and fine tune. And I trust Meredith as much as I could possibly trust another person. And I think that is a big part of how we work together successfully. It's like I don't have to um, be nervous I'm going to say something the wrong way, or like I can just kind of like share stuff that comes to mind and just how it comes out. And we have a lot of fun, being able to, in the dead of winter, like talking on the phone for a couple of hours dreaming about Cuttyhunk. And yeah, um, I think it's just comes from like a joy of working together. And then she has an incredible tech savvy that takes these very complicated computer problems and boils them all down into like a click of a button, and things that might take and normally take me a lot of time plugging in, typing out everything. And she's just a genius with spreadsheets and has created a very I'm system for us. And I'm very grateful for that.
Well, Meredith, you mentioned that you guys say yes to each other a lot, and it sounds like you have a really strong dynamic. Inevitably, though, you have different opinions. And so, how do you guys say no to one another?
Yeah, we do have disagreements. It, it's not like we're always seeing things exactly the same way, but I think we always talk it out. And I think part of the beauty of having that trust and just having such a robust dialogue is that, and feeling safe being able to talk about something. I think we disagree about things somewhat frequently, and I think we both will just sort of say our position, and then at some point one of us will move closer to the other person's position, and it's never like a kind of scorekeeping, or I don't think there's any ego in it. It's really just like, what's the solution that's going to kind of keep us moving? Um, and Tamlin mentioned that this partnership grows out of our friendship, and it's also true that our friendship grows out of this partnership. Like, the way our friendship was built was through working together, and then we've been working together because we're friends. It's sort of like a funny reciprocal circle. And when I think we're also both very mindful, and so if at some point one of us needs to pull back for whatever reason, I think we're both kind of keeping an eye on each other and ourselves at all times. So if I'm trying to think of a good example, but I'm not, nothing concrete is popping to mind, but because we're constantly making little decisions. And so one of us might be like, well, let's bring this visiting artist. And someone will be like, well, maybe not that one. How about this other person? It's like, okay, moving on. And so we don't get too caught up on the details, even though we love the details.
Um, I want to just point out to the audience, so you guys spend a very intense amount of time together on island, but then off island, you don't live near each other, right? Like Meredith, you're on one side of the country, Tamlin, you're on the other side of the country. And so I'm curious, in those moments where you're not together, not talking about Cuttyhunk, but you're back in your studio practice, your creative practice, is there anything, and Tamlin, maybe you can take this, is there anything that seeps in to that space as well as a result of this friendship, friendship?
I think Meredith has made me a lot more aware of the kind of like the career side of being an artist, and how organized she is in that space. And Meredith goes on all sorts of residencies, and she's very organized with like her website and the technological side of being an artist, which is really important. And I think I've learned a lot from Meredith in that area, and I'm kind of always inspired by how she kind of leads her career as an artist. And we did a show together a couple of years ago at the Marion Arts Center. Our work is very different, but we found this kind of common theme, which was it was called illuminations, because Meredith works with light in her projections, and light is an important part of my painting. And so it was fun to kind of see how we could bring together very different types of art. And Meredith had this idea of creating a catalog for the show, and she put it together. She designed the whole thing, the layout, and it was just really, really cool to just watch how she does that. Thinks about the whole picture of being an artist, not just the making of the art.
Love that. Meredith, how about you?
Well, it's funny because that whole show happened because Tamlin asked if I wanted to do it with her. So it's like I feel I've said it many times. Like, I feel like big chapters of my life exist because of Tamalin Baumgarten. It's like it just yeah. I owe Tamalin and this friendship partnership a lot. I mean, I think Tamalin's generosity and attunement and care just seep into everything she does. And I mean, it's like hard to put into words how meaningful it is to be in dialogue with somebody who really cares. And I think it means that both artistically in my work, and then also in the project that we do together, it's like I know that there's somebody who I can talk to about what I'm thinking about. And it's not even that, like, when we have these long phone conversations, it's not like we do sometimes talk about our personal lives. Maybe at the beginning there'll be a kind of 10-minute catch up, but then we kind of jump into it. And there's a real kind of shared joy in working. And I think as an artist, it can be kind of lonely to be in your work. And so to have somebody so thoughtful and intentional on the other side of the line, it's just like an incredible companionship. There's nothing lonely about getting to work on a project with Tam.
Well, and I think you're both getting at, that this idea of the community, the thing that Tamalin was trying to recreate by creating the residency, this idea of like, how do we continue to find connection even when our practices are solitary? That's the beauty of the residency. And yet, I know there is a ton of work that goes into creating that experience for the residents. So, Tamalin, maybe you can take us behind the inn's doors for a moment and just share a little bit about, what are some of the things that no one imagines when they picture running an island art retreat?
Well, Cuttyhunk, it's running a residency on a tiny remote island with no grocery store, a passenger only ferry that runs just once a day, and just very few resources on the island. It comes with some challenges. And what we want to do at the residency is we want to create an effortless experience for the artists who are arriving, where they only have to bring their personal belongings, their art supplies, and they can just enter the island and focus on their work and finding inspiration and making friends. So we try and eliminate all of the hard work that it takes to get there in general. So if you're a vacationer coming to Cuttyhunk or a homeowner, you would go to do a huge grocery shop before coming. You'd load up like 10 coolers of groceries, tons of bins, bring them to the ferry. They would be loaded on the back of the boat. Then you get to Cuttyhunk, they're unloaded, and then you take several golf cart rides up to where you're staying to bring all of your stuff, unpack it all, and then you're cooking yourself pretty much every meal. Um, so we try and we eliminate all of that, um, at least as much as we can, to make it feel like a seamless experience. And there's also just random things that come up that in the spur of the moment, you kind of feel like oh no, how are we going to get through this? There's one example I have from back in 2019. We had a painting workshop in the spring, and I had arranged for the water taxi to pick up the group of artists in New Bedford. And just like a couple hours before the water taxi was supposed to pick up the artists, I got a call from the captain saying that he had engine trouble and that he wasn't going to be able to run the boat. And the regular ferry had already come that day, so there wasn't any other boat option. And I'm just imagining in that moment, I'm imagining all of the artists kind of just arriving to the water taxi dock, ready to get their ride over, and I was scrambling. I went to look for a couple of friends, so Wayne and Seth, who both have their own boats, and I begged them to would you leave the island, go pick up these artists, and bring them back, and they both agreed. And it took two boats because their boats are smaller. We needed two boats, and then luckily my husband was on the mainland, and we because we had to get the group of artists from New Bedford to Paden Harbor, which is 15 minutes away by car, because that's where Wayne and Seth pull their boats in. And so Barry helped me. We asked friends, and we had to get like three different cars of friends in the middle of a workday to go to New Bedford, pick up this group of artists, and bring them to Paden. And I'm also imagining, I'm like, Barry, please try to make this not feel like a crazy situation, because here's here's this strange guy coming down, like saying, hey, by the way, you all need to get in these cars and put your luggage in. We need to move to another spot. Um, so it was kind of crazy, but and then the artists show up to um, Paynerum and they get into like these two salty old guys' boats and head over to Cuttyhunk. And it was an amazing favor that happened from Seth and Wayne. And I remember being there, watching their two boats pull in the channel on Cuttyhunk, and the sun was out and the water was perfectly flat. And it was one of those like perfect fall or spring Cuttyhunk days. And I could see like from far away the smiles on the artists' faces as they were pulling in. Just everyone had this huge smile on their face, and I was just amazed at how we pulled that off. And like it was, and then everyone's like, "Oh, it was fine. Yeah, it was wonderful. Everything worked out great." But there can be a lot of scrambling and behind the scenes.
One of the things I love about how you told that story, Tamalin, is you were constantly sort of putting yourself in the shoes of the visitors and the residents. And I think that's one of the things that is so hard to sometimes remember in the grip of the moment, right? It's easy when it's all calm and like, oh, yes. But the fact that you were constantly even thinking about how Barry should interact with them, I think that's such a helpful reminder for us about, it's usually, we're usually managing the crisis, but we're not experiencing it. And so it's kind of that dual nature. And as you said, being on an island in and of itself, I mean, lots of us may think like Manhattan, that's an island, but Cuttyhunk is truly an island where you are very, very dependent on the elements and the kindness of the community to get things done. So
Yes,
thank you for reminding
absolutely.
me.
Of
So,
course,
so
yes.
Meredith, um, once everything's perfect and you've got all these artists just bright-eyed, ready to go, um, what's hard about that? Like, what's hard about holding space for so many artists?
Yeah. Oh man. Well, just to just reflect on what Tamlin said for just a moment, I think that that's such a good illustration. The story that Tamlin just shared. I wasn't there that particular residency, but that's such a good illustration of Tam's thoughtfulness and how she is holding space for the everybody's experience always. And so, in doing this, we're lucky that we get to build community with artists we don't know. And I think of that as really starting from the moment that somebody applies to the residency. We want from the moment somebody reads our website to feel like they're getting the information that they need and that they're being respected no matter what their journey through the process is. So we take time with our jury, we take time with our notifications when we're communicating with applicants, and then when we finally have our cohort, in the process of like setting the stage for the residents, we've given a lot of thought to what information they need beforehand, because we know it's a big commitment to come to Cuttyhunk. There's some of our residents are paying tuition, and even if they have a fellowship, they're probably paying to get to the island itself, maybe flying across the country, but at the very least getting to New Bedford, taking the ferry over. So it creates I think by the time everybody arrives on the island, we really want them to be prepared to have a great week. And the stakes are kind of high. We're a little nervous. We're excited to meet them. And now we have this kind of dual experience of both thinking about what they're experiencing all the time and trying to keep track of ourselves, and increasingly also thinking about our staff and our chef team. And so as we're moving through the week, we have about 20 people in our brains, just sort of keeping track of their experience and trying to imagine um, what they're going through while knowing that we're necessarily having a different experience. I think when we very first did it, and we were all just kind of volunteers, uh, just out of grad school. It's almost like we were having the same experience as the residents, almost like we were all kind of just going out on a limb and having this kind of wonderful, slightly thrown together experience. And over time, I think we've really built it up more so that we have more structures in place, including having staff who we've helped take on more distinct roles instead of just whatever needed to happen next. And so that involves thinking about the process differently, because now we know we're not having the same experience as everybody else, and that's in part by design. And we're trying to give the residents their own special experience and the staff their own special experience. And the chefs, we're just so grateful to them, and we don't want them to be too burnt out because they're cooking so much. So it can be a lot to keep track of all of that, but there's this beautiful arc that seems to happen where day one everyone arrives, there's some excitement, but people are also a little tentative. They're rooming with people which they may have not done since childhood. They're not some people have singles, but some people have a roommate. They're eating meals with other people. They're in a new place. They're also being vulnerable and sharing their artwork with each other by giving presentations. We do presentations on 2 nights. So it's a big extension. So the first couple of days are a little bit tentative. And we usually find, like, after about day 3 or 4, something shifts and people start to gel and open up and feel that they can really spread out. Like, literally, they start spreading their art supplies out on the porch and they start wandering further and further around the island, and staying up later into the night. And there's just this beautiful kind of opening up, which is not to say that everybody's having the exact same experience. Of course, this is a group of people, humans, everyone's having their own story. But we do find there's this, it's almost like the volume gets turned up over the course of the week. And by the end, people are up late at a bonfire, jumping into the water at night, just really, I think, feeling kind of free and connected in a different way, and hopefully that extends them into a new space when they leave the island with new ideas, new connections, from that experience.
What I'm hearing and what I'm sort of internalizing is this idea that you both really take it seriously, that it's not just that week on the island. It's really from the moment somebody hears about the Cuttyhunk Island Artist Residency that you really want to onboard them into a community that lives before they even get to the island and then after they leave the island. Is that something that you all, I guess Tamalin, if I think about that as like an essence or a part of it, like, is that something in 2017 when this was just a glimmer that was very important to you? Or is that something that has evolved as the program has evolved?
I think it's always been important. I think because Meredith and I are both artists, and that's like we went to school to be artists. And um, so organizing the residency is sort of almost in a way doing something that we feel like we need ourselves as artists. And the what happens after the residency, I like to say, it's only a week long, but it's kind of amazing how much people start out, as strangers, and then over the course of just 1 week become lifelong friends. And seeing um, artists who met on Cuttyhunk, like having shows together afterwards, or it to me, the residency is almost just the beginning. And when people are having to leave Cuttyhunk, it's sad. It's like sometimes we have people, we cry, or the artists are crying because they don't want to leave. And I like to say that this remind myself and everyone else that the residency is just the beginning. That we have the rest of our relationships that we made here continue on beyond and help enrich our experience of being an artist and help us not feel as alone in our studios.
Yeah. And I want to stick with you guys as artists because, while you create this experience, you don't get to necessarily experience what you've created. So I'm curious about like how, and maybe Meredith, you can take this one, but how do you stay connected to your own studio practice while so much of your time and sort of heart share is tending to a community of artists whose work is also unfolding around you?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, off island, it's an easier balance. When we're there at the residency, it's kind of an all-in experience. So we're definitely thinking about the residency pretty much 24/7 while it's happening. But fortunately, part of the residency is making art. So I think that uh, one of the things that I love so much about doing this and having the chance to create one of these communities is that it in part reflects, I think, both of our artistic practices. So Tamalin went to the New York Academy of Art, which is like a much more it's a representational painting, drawing, sculpture school. So she learned like really incredible technique, and I think really had a chance to develop a representational painting practice. Meanwhile, I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is a much more kind of experimental, conceptual school with people working in a bunch of different media. And I was in the film, video, new media, animation department. So pretty far away from traditional oil painting techniques. Um, but I have always been a drawer and have my own history of making representational watercolors. And so something that's been really beautiful about uh, working in this residency capacity is it's like we've had the chance to make our own little art world. So it's a version of the art world where you can have a group of representational painters alongside somebody who's creating sculpture made from debris on the beach, like our artist Rebecca McGee Tuck. Or we've had some great photographers coming through who are there to just observe the landscape and the light, and also making portraits of the other residents. We've had video artists. And so it's almost like a reflection of our two strands of thinking about the world. So, and it allows me to express the sort of duality in myself. So I get to, if I think of it as like, okay, it's a good residency, or we've done a good job when things are calm enough that Tamlin and I can go sit on the porch and have a little bit of painting time together. Like that is really sweet. But it's also been a place where I've been able to workshop, as I mentioned earlier, some of my own ideas. And I've done a lot of projection work on the shoreline, in part because it's this really safe environment. So I can be a woman alone in pitch black conditions on a rocky shoreline doing, my weird experimental environmental projection art and feel I'm a little scared of the dark, but mostly feel safe. Um, and so I absolutely couldn't do that if the ocean weren't right at my door and I wasn't having this Cuttyhunk experience. So yeah, it serves us, but hopefully it also, I think it serves our artists as well to, it's like a version of the art world that is the the motivation is not sales in the space that we're in. It's really how can you make use of being on Cuttyhunk and being part of a community for a week? And so that's the criteria for creating. And I think it's been very fruitful for me and also hopefully for our artists.
I think that's so interesting because I think of your work so much about witnessing and documenting change, like helping us understand how climate or landscape or time changes things. But you also just talked about a very active way the residency is shaping how people might think of themselves even within the art world, right? It gives them a chance to kind of come from wherever they are, like whatever strand or node or, and just kind of be in this created space together and have this, as you said, when sales aren't the primary thing, right? Like have a different kind of orientation to what they might make or what they might try that they wouldn't try or who they might talk to get ideas. Um, yeah, that's really fascinating. So you guys are closing in. I mean, it'll be 10 years very soon, right? 2027, 20-ish, right? So that's a long time to do this really hard and important work. So for each of you, it can be long, short. What's the thing at the center of this residency that keeps you returning to it year after year?
For me, there's a few things. One of them is I get to work with Meredith, with my dear friend Meredith. That really keeps it exciting, and it's a happy experience. And the camaraderie I feel with our residency staff and working with friends toward a common goal is really fulfilling to me. Um, I also love witnessing um, the enjoyment of the artists on the island, especially their facial expressions as they get off the boat. And there's something that happens when you get on the ferry and you're starting to cross Buzzards Bay and you smell the salt air and the diesel fumes and you feel the rolling of the waves and you feel like you're going somewhere different. And then there's that moment where just off in the horizon you see that little strip of land that appears, and it's tiny and it's surrounded by the sea, and you get a little closer and a little closer, and it's like, whoa, like I'm really going to a new world. And then they get off the boat and I see their faces, and it reminds me of that, my first memory of crossing Buzzards Bay. um, and the community feel, as well, and seeing people arrive as strangers and leaving as close friends. That's another reason. There's so many. Also, our visiting artists, getting to meet these amazing, accomplished artists like Hillary Harkness, and we got to meet you there, Era. And I'm very curious to hear at some point what your first impression of Cuttyhunk was when you first got off the boat and hopped in our golf cart and we drove up to the Avalon, and if it had felt like somewhere you had been before, or um, what that first moment was like for you.
I have some beautiful photographs that, I mean, the island just lends itself. But Hillary and I flew into Martha's Vineyard Airport, and then we got to Menemsha, and we waited for um, one of your lovely community members. We actually didn't take the water; they took like a private charter. Who was it? Jeremiah? No, is that
It was the water
Austin?
taxi,
Yeah,
John Paul, and that was the boat that
John
broke down when we picked up our when he was,
And it's
yeah.
no longer in service. So if
Yeah.
anyone's
Paul.
listening and they want to come in the future, there's a new water shuttle that won't break down. We don't think.
Nice. Well, John Paul was wonderful, and I think he was at one point driving with his feet, which I thought was amazing. But no, it was just one of these. To your point, like when you were describing it, I kind of got chills because I'd grown up and gone to Martha's Vineyard, and so when Hillary said we're going to go to Cuttyhunk, and I kind of looked on the map, I was like, oh, cool, been there. Had no idea, and I think for me there was an added layer, and I don't want to take too much time, but just this idea you talked, Meredith, about the whaling industry. Paul Cuffey, I think he was born on Cuttyhunk or
Yes, he
has a
was.
very significant relationship. And growing up, my mom, her maiden name is Cuffey. And she was always like, Paul Cuffey is a relative somehow, somewhere. And so being able to go to the Historic Society and have all of these papers pulled out and get to learn more about Paul Cuffey, for me personally, that was a huge Cuttyhunk experience that I will always take with me. And there are lots of other people and artists who we've met and who have stayed in contact, and seeing them show up at Hillary's, opening a few years ago, that was amazing. So as the listeners can tell, I'm a true believer in Cuttyhunk, but I also am very, very impressed and admire how you two have really allowed it to grow and evolve and have played an active role in scaling it, because that's one of the biggest challenges organizations face is, right, how do we go from this thing that was sort of a startup to now we have staff and now we have more people and like all of these things, and you two have been very thoughtful about asking those questions. So Tamalin, I know that was a little bit of a long-winded rant, but I loved the island and I have never yet encountered anything quite like it.
That's cool. No, I love that. I love the Paul Cuffey connection. And it's kind of amazing how many connections like that happen on this tiny little island. And then you can sometimes run into people that you've known that you never knew you would, see on Cuttyhunk, and it's really
Yeah,
cool.
totally. All right. Well, Meredith, before we go into lightning round, you tell us what keeps you coming back?
I mean, much of what both of you have said, the joy of getting to work with Tamalin and getting to grow this organization, and the specific magic of Cuttyhunk and being in the ocean. And I think when I first went out there, I almost had this like, it was almost intoxicating to realize what an interesting place it was. Not just beautiful, but really interesting. It was um, the site of some pretty important early colonial encounters. The Wampanoag used to fish there. Bartholomew Gosnold landed there in 1602, so really early New England colonial contact. People watched for submarines in World War One and Two, I think, from the bunkers on Cuttyhunk. So it's really um, it's almost like this mini distillation of American history. And it feels like that history exists everywhere, of course, but there's something about the fact that half of the island is preserved land. And there's this beautiful bluff you can go over where you can see the western half of the island and these oyster ponds. And I always find when I go up there that I'm sort of in and outside of time in a way that I don't normally get to be, where I'm both really present in the moment and I'm thinking about the sweep of the centuries and what was there before. There's something about like the quiet there that allows for that kind of, I don't know, transcendent feeling. So it's kind of a magical place. People talk about the magic of Cuttyhunk, and I'm I bought it. I'm sold.
Hook, line,
Um,
sinker. There you are.
yeah, yeah, and then finally this isn't like a formal job, but we get to grow in a way that I feel like as an artist, it's really like I get to have a colleague who's a friend, and we get to have this kind of fluid working relationship that fits in as an artist. Whereas I feel like I might not get to grow in these ways unless I went and had a full time job. But here it's like get to learn about all these things in our sort of weird art way.
Your weird art way that's entirely accessible and sustainable. So good job. Good job there. Well, thank you both. So now we're going to go into the lightning round. I have no sound effects, no fun little like visual effects, but we're still going to have fun. And this is where I'm going to ask each of you some quickish questions, and we'll go from there. So the first one is about preoccupations. So this idea of like when we're telling stories about ourselves or telling stories to others, what are the things we keep coming back to? So it can be phrases that start with things like "I love" or "I hate" or "I hope I never" or "I've always wondered." By now, the audience knows that some of mine are organized animal crime networks, ancestors, Cuttyhunk hit that, and then work-life integration. Meredith, I'm going to start with you. What's one of your preoccupations?
Ooh, uh, uh, glaciers, spreadsheets, other people's feelings, watercolor pigments, my cell phone. I don't know. I feel like
I like that. That started to feel like it could be a novel or like a stand-up comedy routine. Like I like that. That's perfectly in the spirit.
cool. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Tamlin Meredith has started us off really nicely. How about you? meet that bar?
Well, mine, I think it's something I've been thinking about around my painting lately that um, it's this feeling of when you're walking through life that you can have these like completely polar opposite experiences at the same time. And I've been focusing on it more recently, just as I maybe go for a walk or I'm in my studio or just it's and I'm trying to wrap my head around it too. It's that like, you can feel like something is really hard but also meaningful at the same time. You can feel like you can feel lonely in a party with your closest friends and family. You can um you can feel maybe isolated on or you're on an island all by yourself, but you're kind of the company is like the rising sun. But that like we go through life and have this like often two experiences at the same time. And I've been thinking about it a lot because I'm trying to figure out how to put that into my paintings as some way of like visual tension or um, capturing both sides of an experience. So I think that's what's been my preoccupation because it's kind of keeps coming up as something I think about lately.
I can't wait to see how that emerges for you. Wow.
Same, I can't wait either. I haven't seen it quite yet.
Um, well, one of the things I love about this podcast is hearing about what's on people's minds and what you guys are all good at and like what people seek you out for. And so I'm going to mix it up. Tamlin, what is one of Meredith's superpowers to the extent you haven't already shared it?
Yes, well, Meredith is the smartest person in the room, but she doesn't wear it on her sleeve. And I've always looked up to this about Meredith. She is so smart, and but she welcomes you in to her world in this very warm way, and she shares her knowledge and she cares about you as she's speaking to you. And I think that those are the elements that make a really good teacher, I think. You know, you know a lot, you're intelligent, yet you're not arrogant and you're generous with sharing it. Um, so I think Meredith's superpower is she's a brilliant teacher.
Oh, that's very, very touching and somewhat overwhelming to hear. I think everybody's so smart. That's the beauty of it. It's like everyone's got their special, their kind of magic, and it's just finding it. Um, um, okay. Oh boy, I get to talk about Tamla now. That's wonderful. Um, Gosh, I've been the beneficiary of this so many times. Tamalin has like a kind of supernatural attention, like an ability to focus on whatever it is that she's turned her attention to and notice the little details that nobody else would notice. So, I mean, this extends from, for instance, the way she designs breakfast at the residency and little things like, you know, wanting to have it all the different kinds of milks that anyone could possibly want. You want cow milk, you want half and half, you want this kind of nut milk, you want soy milk, and then also making sure that the fridge is never unstocked, so that it's like I would just completely have no concept of any of this. I'd be like, is there milk? Okay, moving on. Is there no milk? Okay, moving on. And that sense of like care, seeing beyond what other people see, and then following through is tremendous. It's so nice to receive, and then it's also so beautiful to witness. Like, we did painting lessons for each other at some point, and I got to witness how Tamalin thinks about color and layering paint, and it was the same kind of supernatural, zooming in on these shifts in color that I think I could not sit there long enough to make that happen, to really both see it and then recreate it. And it's just really kind of stunning to experience. So one of Tam's many superpowers.
Oh, thank you, Meredith.
Well, this one is about an ask. So, you guys, we've talked so much about how you build community for others, and you're so generous with your time and your resources. So, I want to give you an opportunity, each of you separately or together, however you feel most inclined. What is something that the audience can do for you?
I just want to say, learn more about the artist residency. Or if you're an artist, or if you have friends who are artists, share about this experience they could have out on a tiny island off the coast of Massachusetts. And go to our website, cuttyhunkartist.org, and and come visit us on Cuttyhunk. If you ever are in the area and you've heard this podcast, like, reach out to us and see if you can come. We can meet up there on the little island.
Yeah, we have several free programs during the residency. We have artist talks, like by wonderful artists such as Hilary Harkness, and musical performances. And we've had a scientist come out and talk, and these are all free and open to the public. So you got to get to Cuttyhunk, but if you're there, yeah, we'd love to share this with you, whether as a resident or just as somebody coming by.
All right, give me that URL one more time.
Cuttyhunkartists.org.
Lovely. All right, final question. This one is very important to me. There is so much content out there, and I simply don't have enough time to discover it. And I feel that the audience probably feels similarly. So, if each of you, a read, a listen, a watch, something you're reading, listening to, and watching that others might enjoy. Meredith, we'll start with you.
Can I give you a listen, and a listen?
Sure, give me a listen times 3.
I as somebody who is painting, I end up listening to a lot of podcasts, and I feel like since this is a wonderful podcast, maybe some folks like to listen to other things too. I really love psychology podcasts, and Esther Perel, is famous couples counselor, has her couples counseling podcast, but she also has one called How's Work. So in this kind of theme of working partnerships, that's an enjoyable listen. And I also listen to this like pretty just psychology podcast called Psychiatry and Psychology, I think. And it's just interviews with practicing psychologists. I just find it very interesting. Not all, some of it goes over my head as a little clinical, but just really delving into how people tick and thinking about other people who are trying to work with them is fascinating. And then in the art space, there's a lovely podcast called Beyond the Studio, which I've never met the hosts, but they are two artist friends, and I feel like they have a kind of parallel relationship to mine and Tamalin's, where they were friends first, but they've been hosting this podcast for several years where they bring on guests and interview them, and they're really thinking about the behind the scenes of people's studio practices. So it's this kind of mixture of thinking about art and a career as in a way that I think we are too. And I hope someday to cross paths with them. So
there you go.
A couple of things.
Thank you for those 3 listens. Very helpful. Tamalin, how about you?
So I'm rewatching The White Lotus, which is maybe just for my pure entertainment, but I enjoy
Which
that.
season are you watching? All of them or a particular one?
I started back from the first one, and then now I'm on the second one. Yeah. And maybe it goes with my preoccupation of like being in this really beautiful place that's, relaxing. It's supposed to be relaxing and vacation and beautiful landscape, yet there's so much inner turmoil going on with the characters, and no one can really settle into that experience. being in the beautiful place. And then I've been listening to, or whenever I need a little inspiration for a podcast, like sometimes I'll listen to How I Built This with Guy Raz. And what I like about that one is there's a theme that kind of goes throughout all of the podcasts, that these very successful um, entrepreneurs who build these huge companies. It tells you the story of their journey from the very beginning. And there's always a kind of a big mistake or failure or um, mishap that happens while they're trying to build these companies. And there's a theme of people often saying that, like, the mistake, if without those mistakes and failures, you wouldn't really have the success that you have in the end, because you learn so much from you learn so much along the way, and you end up pivoting, and these what feels like a catastrophe ends up actually being the best thing that could have ever happened to create your success. So I like to think about that, to embrace our failures and to think about, wow, I really learned a lot from that. Um, and then Era, I've been listening to that book that you recommended, Unreasonable Hospitality. Meredith got me a copy of it for my birthday last year, and so I've been reading and then also listening to it. But I love that. It's great. I love the fact that the that hospitality is not just about how you treat your guests, but it's about how you treat your staff and how you um, create a really warm environment where the staff feels um, empowered and um, take pride in doing the best job that they can do.
I love all of that. I have so enjoyed getting to spend time with you too. I feel like, when we do spend time, it's really just enriching and inspiring, and this has been no different. So thank you so much for taking the time to share and to join me on I'm Here Too.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Era. It's
Honor.
been so nice to be with you, and as always. And we always learn so much from you, and you're a true inspiration.
Oh, well, it's wonderful when it can go all three ways. So thank you. And Cuttyhunk Artist.
.org.
Okay, cuttyhunkartist.org. All right, we will see you next time. Well, that's all for this episode of I'm Here Too. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed our conversation. Please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss the next conversation. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.